a religion famous for the celebrities that are involved. But what is going on behind the scenes? Follow me down the rabbit hole about Scientology. Hello, friends, and welcome back to the rabbit hole. I'm your host, Danny, and today we are talking about Scientology. I know I just did like a 2-part episode for Antarctica. I'm now doing another 2-part episode for Scientology just because I started to get into the history of the creator of Scientology, and there's so much history and so much stuff that goes on, and I think it's really important to understand his background and his history in order to understand the conspiracies that go on and all the things that go on in Scientology. So this episode, I don't even think I'm going to even get to the conspiracy theories today. I think I'm just going to explain his background, his history. It's crazy. You cannot make this stuff up, which is why I decided to do 2 parts because this is going to be a lot. So first things first, I want to go ahead and thank Caitlin who requested this episode, as well as Jeff. Thank you guys for requesting this. And if you guys have sent in requests, I've gotten so many requests lately. I am working through them. So you're going to hear just a bunch of basically every episode from here till probably the end of the year is just requests that I've received from you guys because I want to give episodes that you want to listen to. So keep an ear out, for your episode. When it comes, I will give you a shout out as I do with everyone. So thank you all for sending so many requests. If you don't hear yours for a while, it might have got lost in my DMs, and please go ahead and DM me again. But I have a list and I'm working through it. So thank you all so much. So we're going to start with what is Scientology, right? For this information, I went straight to the source, right to the Scientology website. So according to the official website, Scientology, quote unquote, is a religion that offers a precise path leading to a complete and certain understanding of one's true spiritual nature and one's relationship to family or self, family, groups, mankind, all life forms, the material universe, the spiritual universe, and the supreme being, end quote. So Scientology is said to address the spirit, not just the body and the mind. And they believe in the fundamental truths, some of which, again, I got right off the website, include man is an immortal spiritual being. His experience extends well beyond a single lifetime, and his capabilities are unlimited, even if not presently realized. So different from other religions, Scientology says that spiritual salvation depends upon the man himself, his fellows, and his attainment of brotherhood with the universe. Furthermore, they don't expect you to believe anything based on faith alone. So they're really trying to reach into the person and the spirit. It gets really kind of psychological, even though you'll learn that Hubbard, who is the founder, eventually hates psychology and all of that. But it's very psychological, very a lot of mind work for sure. But without further ado, let's get into the founder, Lafayette Ron Hubbard. He was born on March 13th, 1911 in Tilden, Nebraska. His mom was a teacher and his dad was a naval officer. So they moved around a bit, because military. And then they eventually settled in Helena, Montana in 1913, so a couple years after he was born. But his father rejoined the military, the Navy, in 1917 during World War I. Probably because of World War I, it's like a sense of duty. So that's kind of what his childhood was. Hubbard was kicked out of high school, or one of the high schools that he went to, because of failing grades. And he failed the Naval Academy entrance exam and was supposed to take it again, but was diagnosed with myopia or nearsightedness, which stopped him from ever enrolling in the Naval Academy. I mean, he didn't want to go to the Navy. This wasn't really his plan. So, and later he would write in a journal that he actually lied about the nearsightedness to get out of the Navy. He went to George Washington University in Washington, D.C., but did poorly. Of course, because he failed out of like 3 high schools, I think, before he went to George Washington University in Washington, D.C. And again, was at risk of being kicked out due to his bad grades. But he attended the university for 2 years before he eventually dropped out. So they didn't kick him out due to the bad grades, but he did drop out. He spent most of the 1920s and 30s in Washington, D.C., where he interacted with several psychiatrists. Remember this part because it blows my mind later on. He had encounters with Navy psychiatrist Joseph Thompson and the supervisor of the D.C. Psychiatric Hospital St. Elizabeth's, William Allenson White. And he would later claim that he trained under both of them. So he seemed to have like a decent relationship with these guys. Like he was very interested in the field. He trained under both of these guys. And then later on, he basically hates psychiatry and the whole institution. So we'll get there. In 1933, Hubbard renewed a relationship with an old friend and quickly married her. And they had 2 kids together, but seemed to be struggling for money, which will be just like a theme in his whole life. So Hubbard began a writing career and tried to write for mainstream publications. He soon realized that his niche was pulp fiction magazines, and he became like a pretty prolific writer in that medium because that's just like what he was good at. He was good at science fiction. Between the 1934 and 1940, he wrote hundreds of short stories that were mostly science fiction, publishing his full-length novel in 1937 called Buckskin Brigades. And throughout his life, he just published writing after writing after writing after writing. It was like his thing. He just kept like publishing writings. He found great success under editor John W. Campbell, who published many of his short stories in his magazines. He had 2 magazines called Unknown and Astounding Science Fiction. In the magazine Unknown, Hubbard's psychological thriller titled Fear became a huge hit, getting him recognition from some pretty big names, actually. In 1941, Hubbard joined the Navy Reserves as an O2, or lieutenant junior grade, as an intelligence officer, which blows my freaking mind because, like, dude's not intelligent, so how did he become an intelligence officer? But his naval career was rough. He was supposed to go to the Philippines right after Pearl Harbor by way of Australia, but he was sent home after sending a blockade runner out of her way by like 3,000 miles. And they're like, maybe we won't send you to the Philippines. So they sent him home. And then he became a commander of a patrol boat in the Boston Navy Yard and was relieved when the yard commander said he was, quote unquote, not temperamentally fitted for independent command, which he was like grateful to not be in command anymore. But then he was given command of a submarine chaser, and this is like, I don't understand. 5 hours into a shakedown cruise, like one of the first ones that he did, they thought they had found an enemy sub and engaged in combat for 68 hours, only to find out they had mistaken a known magnetic deposit for an enemy sub. So like they were getting these like readings that something was there, but the Navy had already known about that there was like a magnetic deposit under there. So it wasn't a submarine. 68 hours, and Lord knows how much money they spent trying to kill the submarine. And then just a month after that, he fired upon this island, which was a Mexican island, and Mexico was our ally, or is our ally at the time. And so they relieved him of command after that. So silly. After he was relieved of that command, so this is the second command he's been relieved of, he started to complain of like a variety of ailments, to include like ulcers, malaria, back pain, all kinds of things. He was admitted to the San Diego Naval Hospital for observation, but he remained there for 3 months. Later, he wrote in like a diary that he used the stomach issues as a way to get out of the Navy, like get out of the Navy's punishment for him. So this is the second time now he has faked something like an ailment to not get the repercussions of the Navy. He didn't want to go to the Navy initially, then he did join the Navy, and now he's like, well, I don't want to get in trouble for the things that I did because I was stupid, so let me just pretend like I'm really sick. And eventually, he got away with it. After war, Hubbard chose to stay in California instead of returning home to his family in Washington state. So at the time, his wife and his 2 kids with her had lived in Washington state this whole time near one of his aunts because they were having money issues before he joined the military, before World War II. So they moved close to a family so they could have support. Well, his family and his 2 kids are still, or his wife and his 2 kids are still up there with that family member of his. But he stays in in California, and he moved into this mansion of John Jack Whiteside Parsons, who was a rocket propulsion engineer and a leading follower of the English occultist Aleister Crowley. And he'll come back around a lot of times. This seemed to be kind of the turning point for Hubbard, because I think the Aleister Crowley, the occultist of that, it changed a lot in his brain. I think he started to realize some things there. So Hubbard and Parsons, remember Jack Parsons is the owner of this mansion. He's a big player as well. So for this moment, they became friends. They started collaborating on Babylon working, which was a sex magic ritual intended to summon an incarnation of Babylon, who was a supreme goddess in Crowley's pantheon. So he's really getting into this Aleister Crowley thing, right, with Parsons, who was already a follower. During this time, he created a document which has been called the Affirmations. And this seems to be a series of statements relating to various physical, sexual, psychological, social issues that he was encountering in his life. It also seems like these affirmations were intended to be a form of self-hypnosis, trying to instill positive mental attitude, which is a lot like what we use affirmations for today, right? So we have these affirmations that we would tell ourselves to try to boost our self-esteem, to make ourselves feel good and believe good things about ourselves. So he was just before his time, because this is still late 40s. Parsons, Hubbard, and Parsons' girlfriend, Sarah Northrup, who was also sleeping with Hubbard at the time, invested their life savings in a plan for Hubbard and Sarah to buy yachts on the East Coast and then sail them to the West Coast and sell them. So I'm not sure if yachts were just worth a lot more on the West Coast or what was going on, but Hubbard, who actually, he had put in almost no money because he didn't have any money. Parsons and Sarah put in most of the money. He used this as an opportunity to just run away with the money.
Did you know that over 40% of Americans have a hard time swallowing pills? So when it's time to take your vitamins, large capsules and pills are out of the question. We know that gummy vitamins exist, but they're full of sugar, they get stuck in your teeth, and they only contain a fraction of the nutrients you need. Luckily, Easy Melts has discovered the ultimate vitamin sweet spot. Vitamins that melt in your mouth, taste like a treat, and are packed with nutrients ready for absorption, all without an ounce of sugar. For a limited time, Easy Melts is giving listeners a free 3-month supply of vitamin D3 with their first purchase. To claim your free D3 vitamins, visit try.easymelts.com/spring24. That's try.melts.com/spring24. Say goodbye to the old way of taking your vitamins and say hello to the easy way. Menopausal and perimenopausal women, listen up. It's time to take control of your health and comfort, and Winona is here to help. Winona is a telemedicine company for menopause care who believes that your symptoms are real, important, and deserve to be taken seriously. And for many women, this starts with hormone replacement therapy. Winona's HRT is made with plant-based, bioidentical hormones rather than synthetic ones, so it better aligns with your body to offer relief from hot flashes, weight gain, and other uncomfortable symptoms. 80% of women who use Winona find relief within just 90 days. So, what are you waiting for? Get started today. Visit buywinona.com today to start your free visit. With free shipping and the ability to pause or cancel at any time, your path to wellness has zero obligations. Use code SPRING24 at buywinona.com for 25% off your first treatment plan. That's BYWINONA.com for 25% off. Winona, menopause care made easy.
And Hubbard, I mean, he got away with it basically. So Parsons had to sell his mansion just to like try to stay like afloat, try to keep his life together. But then Hubbard took it one step forward and married Sarah. So Sarah had been Parsons' girlfriend since the time that Hubbard moved into Parsons' mansion, sleeping with Hubbard this whole time while she's living with Parsons. And then after they'd run away with all of his money, the two get married. But the thing is, Hubbard did not divorce his first wife. So he's still got a wife and 2 kids up in Washington State. Now he's married to a whole new lady. And they have a kid together eventually too. And with all that, Hubbard went back to writing because he's out of the Navy now. He, stole this guy's money. And now he just went back to his writing. So from 1947 to 1950, he had a number of stories in the magazine Astounding Science Fiction, but he was still struggling with money. So he wrote to the VA to increase his war pension, and eventually they did increase his pension. So he had this war pension for the rest of his life that he got it increased because he needed more money. In May of 1950, Hubbard's famous writing, Dianetics, the Modern Science of Mental Health, came out. And this is where the cult-like aspect of his life started, because he had been following Aleister Crowley with Parsons for a while, and now he's like, maybe I could do something like that. In this work, he claimed that most illnesses were psychosomatic and that Dianetic therapy would cure most illnesses. The book was not received well in the press or scientific and medical communities. Imagine that. But it had this cult-like commercial following. People loved it. They were like, oh my gosh, if we could only cure ourselves with no medicine, no basically doctor intervention, which is what he was selling. So 500 Dianetic auditing groups were set up across America, and the Hubbard Dianetic Research Foundation was established. At the foundation, financial control was super lax, and randomly Hubbard would just take large sums of money with no explanation, which will be a theme for the rest of his life, that all of these foundations and things that he sets up, he just takes money whenever he wants to. It's like the Ron Hubbard show. As quickly as the book gained popularity, it completely lost it. So on August 10th of the same year, Hubbard was putting on a presentation about the results, and it went horribly wrong. He brought on this lady on stage and explained to the crowd that she had perfect recall, that she could remember everything. So he, covered up his tie, and he was like, what color is my tie? And she said the wrong color, which, if his teachings are actually working, if everything that he's saying is working, and she has perfect recall, then she should know the color of his tie. So that was quite the fail. On September 3rd, so just a little less than a month later, psychologist Eric Fromm describes Dianetics as a, quote, mixture of some oversimplified truths, half-truths, and plain absurdities. This actually caused quite the downfall of the book. And because it came from a psychologist, it started, Hubbard felt personally attacked about it. But, basically nobody in the science and medical communities were believing it anyway. But he, took this as a personal attack against him. By late 1950, the foundation was basically in a financial crisis. Many of the people that supported Hubbard and worked for the foundation had resigned. So these are people that, had helped him come up. So his editor from earlier, all these different people, this doctor, these really important people to the cause were like, yeah, we're done. We're going to go now. Also during this time, Hubbard started having an affair with an employee. So, okay, if you're keeping up, if you're counting, he has a wife and 2 kids in Washington State. His wife, Sarah, and their kid are with him, and now he's got this new love interest. Hubbard's affair actually caused Sarah to start her own affair because she was like, well, screw you. If you can do it, I can do it, right? So then, on February 23rd of 1951, Sarah and her lover, whoever he was, consulted a psychiatrist about Hubbard. I'm not sure what prompted them to do this, but the doctor told Sarah that she was in grave danger and that Hubbard should be committed, which honestly could have saved a lot of people a lot of money. But anyway, neither here nor there, he was not committed because Hubbard found out about this and he kidnapped their 1-year-old daughter and Sarah. He attempted to find a doctor that would find Sarah insane, but he couldn't. So he let Sarah go and he took their daughter and he left to Cuba. The more I learned about his history, the more I was like, what is this guy doing? And we haven't even gotten into the Scientology part of it yet. So he called the FBI and reported that Sarah and her lover were communist infiltrators. And it seemed as though the agent took the report like they really believed him. They're like, yeah, okay, yeah, we have communist infiltrators in our country. So, but Sarah's claims about Hubbard went public and went to the papers. So they're like, this is like the most public husband-wife spat ever. The papers literally said, quote, Ron Hubbard insane, says his wife, end quote. And those papers got all the way back to his first wife. When she saw the papers, she reached out to Sarah offering support, saying that she believed that Sarah was telling the truth, that she was part of this and she was under his influence and she understands what Sarah's saying is true. So the only way Sarah could get her daughter back from Hubbard, who was still in Cuba at the time, is that she had to sign a statement written by Hubbard saying that she misrepresented him. Basically, like she was lying. It was all just a joke. But I mean, I would do the same for my kid. So I don't know. I would do anything to get my child back. So I would sign it. I'm sure, and she did. She signed it. She got it back. But after Dianetics failed, Hubbard created Scientology, which I don't know how one of them failed so horrifically, and the other one, I don't know how Scientology made it through. After learning all this, it doesn't make any sense to me. So he announced a new science beyond Dianetics at a conference in Wichita, Kansas. And Dianetics promised to reach like a superhuman state of clear, is what they called it, whereas Scientology promised a chance to achieve godlike powers called operating thetan. And thetan is an immortal soul, and he wrote books about this, and then he would also like present it to people at conferences. And at the same time, he introduced a device called an electropsychometer, or an e-meter, which was supposed to measure your skin's changes in sweat and grip when holding these like 2 metal cans. And he presented this e-meter as having an almost mystical power to reveal an individual's innermost thoughts. Later on, he's going to end up using this more like a lie detector machine because he honestly believes that it literally reveals your innermost thoughts. So everything he used the e-meter for in Scientology is kind of like, I don't know, it's more like he's trying to figure out what you're thinking than like you trying to reach your spiritual wellness or whatever. And at this point, Hubbard, who is no longer with Sarah and no longer with his first wife, he's got 3 kids between the two of them, he married a 20-year-old named Mary Sue. And the two of them moved to Phoenix, where they opened the only official Scientology organization called the Hubbard Association of Scientologists, or HAS. Mary Sue, just so you know, I think I forget later, but she goes on to have like 4 kids with Hubbard. And I'm not sure if he ever actually divorces Sarah. He for sure never divorced his first wife, so they're still legally married. And now he's married Sarah, and now he's married Mary Sue. And I have no idea if he ever divorces any of them, ever. Pretty sure he's just married 3 times. So all the other organizations or branches or whatever of the organization were like franchises, and they were required to pay HAS 10% of the income they received. In July of 1952, Hubbard published What an Audit, which was later renamed Scientology, A History of Man, which taught that everyone had subconscious traumatic memories from past lives as clams, sloths, and cavemen. And this caused neurosis and health problems, which I don't know, like, where did he figure out, like, clams, sloths, and cavemen? Like, why those things? But that's what he published. He published a lot of books about a lot of things. He just kept writing books. And even now, Scientologists refer back to most of his writings, and he wrote a lot. He must have just had a lot to say. In November of 1952, he published Scientology 8 TAC 80 or Dash 80. And in December, he came out with Scientology 8-8008, both of which suggested that the physical universe is a creation of the mind. So he like had the book and then he just revised it and came out with another book a month later. I don't know. Also in December, Hubbard gave it like a 70-hour series of lectures in Philadelphia where he connected rituals and the practice of Scientology to the magical practices of Aleister Crowley, which will be a theme his entire life. Aleister Crowley really had an impact on him. He also recommended Crowley's book, The Master Therian. 38 people attended the series, the whole 70 hours of it. In April of 1953, Hubbard suggested setting up, quote, spiritual guidance centers for, quote, the religion angle. So he wasn't like initially thinking about a religion, but eventually he was like, you know what? You know what we need? A religious angle. Because later that year in December, he incorporated the Church of Scientology in Camden, New Jersey. He did this as a way to protect Scientologists from being charged for practicing medicine without a license. Although, I'm not sure what his motive really was, because just 5 years earlier, he said, quote, writing for a penny a word is ridiculous. He was right, remember? If a man really wants to make $1 million, the best way would be to start his own religion, end quote. So he had this kind of in his brain for a while. And honestly, it worked, because in 1954, in California, the Church of Scientology was recognized by the IRS as tax exempt. But it wouldn't be until 1966 that the tax exemption was nationwide for the entire Church of Scientology. The church actually seemed to solve Hubbard's financial issues. Imagine that. It became quite profitable for him because he received a percentage of the church's income. So, by 1957, he was being paid like $250,000 a year, which is about $2.6 million today. So that's a good chunk of change, right? But Hubbard was not like nice. I don't know how to say it. He was known for attacking enemies, and even told his followers to never defend, only attack. And he would encourage people to manufacture evidence and file lawsuits against enemies. Just like, file a lawsuit. Yep, blame it on them. Anyone who wanted to leave Scientology and create their own group was shut down, and I'm sure sued. And he attacked like all kinds of people. He attacked a man that had funded the Hubbard Dianetic Research Foundation in Wichita, and it was actually one of the most successful charters, but because he eventually stopped supporting Dianetics, then Hubbard went into a legal battle with him. And after that legal battle, he turned his attention to the psychiatrists that he blamed for the backlash against both Dianetics and Scientology, because he basically was like, you guys are the problem. You did this to me. You made it hard for me. So now I'm going to sue all of you. But he did not stop there, because in 1955, he authored Brainwashing, a synthesis of the Russian textbook on psychopolitics, which was supposed to be like the secret manual basically linking psychiatry and communism. And he made it seem like it was written by a Soviet secret police chief. So he wrote this as like a way to say that psychology and psychiatry it's bad and nobody should get help. Mental help is not for you. It's not for anybody. It's for the devil. It's for communism. Then he founded the National Academy of American Psychology, and this sought to issue a loyalty oath to the psychiatrists and psychologists of America, basically. And if they opposed the oath, they were labeled as subversive. But if they just refused to sign the oath, then they were labeled as potentially subversive. Which, like, you can't just create a National Academy of American Psychology and then force everybody to sign this oath. It just feels really weird. Like, they're doctors, so they already have an oath. Whatever. He was actively against the psychology field, which is interesting given his history with them, like I said earlier. But ever since his second wife, Sarah, had accused him of being a paranoid schizophrenic, he decided psychiatric help was completely out. He wouldn't let anyone in Scientology get help. No talk therapy, medications, nothing. Like, you will not get help. And several people needed help. In fact, I read this one article of this lady who was a Scientologist, and she was stabbed by her son 70 times. And, like, she knew before she was ever stabbed that her son needed medical attention, like, needed mental health help. But because Scientology is so against mental health help, she died for it. But he continued down the path of trying to criticize our society and criticizing the medical field. In 1956, he published Fundamentals of Thought, basically saying that life is a game and it divides people into pieces, players, and game makers. And then he published All About Radiation, which claimed that radiation poisoning and cancer could be cured by vitamins, because they didn't try that first. And then he published Have You Lived Before This Life, which was a collection of past life regressions. So, again, he's just publishing books left and right. In 1958, the IRS actually withdrew the tax exemption because the Hubbard family was profiting unreasonably from it. So they were like, yeah, this is, supposed to be for a church, and you guys seem to be making a lot of money as a family, which doesn't seem right. And later, his first son, who had been with Hubbard since the creation of Scientology, left due to financial hardship. This first son is the son from his first wife way back in the day. He, as soon as Scientology became a thing, his nickname was Nibs. He was basically Lafayette Ron Hubbard Jr. They called him Nibs, and he left Scientology due to financial hardship. So that tells me that he was not one of the ones profiting unreasonably from the tax exemption. I'm sure it was Hubbard, but Hubbard didn't take this well at all. He was actually deeply hurt by it. He started interrogating members of the church with e-meters and asked them questions like, have you ever practiced homosexuality? Have you ever had unkind thoughts about L. Ron Hubbard? He started using e-meters basically as lie detectors to figure out, what are people's real intentions towards me? Are there ill intentions towards me? Am I, very narcissistic. Very narcissistic. In 1963, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration raided American offices of the Church of Scientology and seized over 100 e-meters as illegal medical devices and thousands of pills that were being marketed as radiation cures and literature that made false medical claims. And one of the whole reasons he decided to make this a church in the first place is so they wouldn't get in trouble for illegally practicing medicine. But here they are getting in trouble for illegally practicing medicine. Later that same year in Australia, they were under investigation for brainwashing, blackmail, extortion, and damaging the mental health of its members. And this led to Scientology being banned in Victoria, Western, and South Australia. And actually, it caused a bunch of negative publicity around the world for Scientology. So after this, Hubbard buckled down on the members, requiring them to disconnect from people or organizations that were deemed suppressive and requiring members to write reports on each other, which actually all feels very Johnstown, not Johnstown, excuse me, Jonestowny to me. Maybe this is where Jonestown got the idea, because Jonestown happened maybe like a year or 10 years later, but it's feeling very Jonestown-esque for sure. Although they did not kill themselves, because Scientology is still around, and Jonestown was a massacre. If you don't know about Jonestown, it's actually really interesting. I don't think there's really like a conspiracy there, but if you guys are interested, I'll post a little poll on my Instagram if you want me to just do like a history episode about Jonestown. It's just really interesting. So if you're interested in that, I will do an episode. I don't mind, but it's not a conspiracy theory. So the negative press basically didn't stop. The world was like, Scientology's weird, something's wrong with it. No, we don't know if we like it. So they banned it from the UK, and Hubbard was actually deemed as an undesirable alien from the UK. So he wasn't even allowed to go there. After that, Canada, New Zealand, and South Africa all launched investigations into Scientology. But at this point, Hubbard had purchased three ships and founded the Sea Organization, or Sea Org, which was a private navy of elite Scientologists. Basically, like the top of the top got to go to Sea Org. And at this point, he also publicly relinquished management of the Church of Scientology, but his wife, Mary Sue, began managing it. So he didn't like leave Scientology. He was just like, look, I'm not the manager anymore. Ta-da. Which actually didn't do anything for him. But even though he relinquished management, he still got updates, weekly updates, and he got $15,000 a week from the church. Because he's still the founder of the church. His fleet was sailing from port to port in the Mediterranean Sea and the eastern North Atlantic. And he claimed that he was being pursued by enemies who would lead to global chaos or nuclear war. So that's why he had to keep moving. He wouldn't stay in one port for more than 6 weeks because somebody was going to cause the world to collapse if they caught him. I don't know why he's so important, but that's what his thoughts were. All the while, conditions aboard the ships were awful. Like, Hubbard was obviously living lavishly, but nobody else was. So he would like have people thrown overboard, and then he would film it. Like, people that disobeyed him, as one of the punishments, he was like, yep, throw him overboard. And sometimes he would just watch. Sometimes he would literally just like take a video because he wanted to watch it later. I don't know if it brought him pleasure to see his people suffering. Like, that's pretty messed up. He would also lock people to the bilge tanks with no access to toilets and then hardly any food. And the food they did got like came in buckets. And all this time, he had some members searching for evidence of his past lives, which I don't really understand why they were searching for evidence of his past life, but that's what he had going on while he was on these ships. He also created his own, like, basically like a paramilitary force and gave them like this R245 orders. And what that means is basically they are going to take these orders, and it has like a target on the orders, and they will shoot this person, whoever the target is, with a .45 caliber pistol. So he had people just like kind of going in all different directions. He's got these people that are like the military force, and he's got these people that are searching for his past lives, and then all the people aboard that are being treated like crap. But then at the same time, he had the children of the Sea Org members serving him personally. And by children, I mean like mostly girls. It seemed like it wasn't any boys actually at all. And these girls would have to dress in super skimpy clothing and were required to do things like light Hubbard's cigarettes and dress him. And he would give them orders to give to the other members. So he'd be like, hey, go tell so-and-so to like swab the deck. And then these girls would like scurry off. They were like his personal servants, which is disgusting. And they're children. They are children, like young kids. They're not even close to of age. So that's real gross. I mean, but that kind of tracks because every time he got a wife, she was younger and younger and younger. So I don't know. He's into the young girls, but I would not put my child into that situation. Here we are. Then he had tried to establish basically like a safe haven for Scientology in Greece, but was asked by the Greek officials to leave. And the legitimacy of the religion was just being questioned over and over because people were like, something it's just not adding up here, basically. And then he had tried to establish a safe haven in Morocco, but that ended poorly. Like, he was trying to establish himself with the military and the police force and all this. Ended up he had to flee the country, and he was also at risk of extradition to France. So he left his Sea Org and moved to Queens temporarily, Queens, New York, because he was like, I'm gonna go to jail, or I'm gonna get extradited to France where I'm going to be prosecuted. But once the threat of extradition was over, he just went back to sea. And they've been living at sea for a while. In the summer of 1975, Hubbard suffered a major heart attack while he was on the island of Curacao in the Caribbean. So after that episode, he moved back to the U.S. to establish basically like a land base, and he went straight to Florida. I mean, that makes sense because he's close to the Caribbean. And he kind of moved all over after that, but he established like the land base in Clearwater, Florida, which is still where like the headquarters of Scientology is. When he moved back to the U.S., he went on the run a little bit. He was in Florida, he was in Washington, D.C., he was in California, he was kind of all over the place, just trying to figure out his life. In 1976, Hubbard's son Quentin was found unconscious in his car with a hose connected to the tailpipe. Hubbard didn't seem to show any grief at all, nor did he care that his son tried to commit suicide. In fact, he only cared what it looked like what his public image looked like now. So he was caught yelling, quote, "That stupid fucking kid, look what he's done to me." So Hubbard seriously didn't even care that his kid was trying to kill himself. Just the fact that his public image was going to suffer. And Quentin did die as a result of this incident. And that was one of his children, I think, from his third wife, Mary Sue. So one of the younger of the kids. In the 60s, Hubbard had established a branch of Scientology called Guardian's Office. And this was also around the time that Nibs had left the organization. And so he was trying to crack down. So this Guardian's Office, they were responsible for carrying out all of Hubbard's demands, such as infiltrating several 3-letter agencies to try to I don't even know what they were trying to do. But he had this office just doing all kinds of things. And they had different locations all over the U.S. In 1977, the FBI actually raided several of the Guardian's Office locations in LA and Washington, D.C., and they retrieved all kinds of things like wiretap equipment, burglary tools, and over 90,000 pages of incriminating documents. Because the Guardian's Office had been up to some shady things. They were basically a 3-letter agency for Scientology. So the CIA or the FBI, but Scientology's CIA or FBI, and they were infiltrating the U.S. government, CIA and FBI, and all these 3-letter agents. It was crazy. These raids actually caused Hubbard to flee yet again from California. This time he went to Nevada. So in 1979, he went further into hiding, moving back to California, and he would only allow 10 trusted messengers to be his contact to the outside world. So 10 people were allowed to come and go from his apartment, but that was it. And he didn't see his wife or his kids after this. I'm pretty sure at all, until he died. A year later, he went even further than that into hiding and only trusted 2 messengers. And those 2 people would move around with him and go everywhere with him. But those were the only 2 people that were allowed to physically have contact or talk to him. All the while, Hubbard had written about Christ and about the Antichrist and in the Antichrist who would reign basically when Christ was not present. And his oldest son, Nibs, actually said in an interview, quote, "My father thought of himself as the beast 666 incarnate." the Antichrist. Aleister Crowley thought of himself as such, and when Crowley died in 1947, my father then decided he should wear the cloak of the beast and become the most powerful being in the universe. You've got to realize that my father did not worship Satan. He thought he was Satan. He was one with Satan. I mean, when you think you're the most powerful being in the universe, you have no respect for anything, let alone worship. End quote. So if that gives you like a little bit of insight into like the thought process of this guy, and he fully adopted everything Aleister Crowley was saying. He even told his followers to preserve his teachings because one day he would be reincarnated as a political leader instead of a religious leader, and his teachings would need to be readily available. For the last 2 years of his life, Hubbard basically remained in hiding. In 1985, the IRS notified the church that they wanted to indict Hubbard for tax fraud because he had still been receiving money from the church this whole time, but he hadn't been paying taxes on it. Imagine that. And later, he allegedly attempted suicide. We're not sure if he actually did or if it was just an accident, but L. Ron Hubbard had a stroke on January 17th of 1986, and he died a week later. So that was it. He was dead. But after that, after he died, David Miscavige took over the church and just continued on with everything that Hubbard would have wanted him to do. Because you have all these like devout followers of Scientology, right? And they're like, okay, well, like now we just keep going. Although many Hollywood elites practice Scientology, the spiritual headquarters, like I said, is in Clearwater, Florida, and has been since he had that major heart attack and went to Florida to establish the land base. Sea Org is 100% still a thing in Scientology. And after a long investigation, the IRS finally returned the tax-exempt status of Scientology, or of the Church of Scientology, in 1993. So they're officially like considered a church. They're officially considered like tax exempt because they have been, they got all that back. In 2009, Germany joined the list of countries that does not allow Scientology. You think like after Hubbard's death, maybe they got a little better. Nope. In France, they found the church guilty of fraud because the extradition didn't ever happen for Hubbard. That's not true. I think he was extradited. And he was sentenced to like pay a fine or whatever. But they did not ban the church altogether. Like Scientology is still allowed in France, but it's just been found guilty of fraud. In 2013, the UK finally came around and is allowing Scientology as a religion. I think they started allowing it because some people wanted to get married under the Scientology religion in the UK. So they were like, okay, well, we'll just like, it'll be fine. Like, it'll be fine. So I think that the UK chalked it up to Hubbard being the problem, whereas, I mean, none of the other countries have really let the religion back into their countries. So there's still a lot of issues, I would say, but the country that is the most lenient and allows and has, I mean, the biggest following of Scientology is the US. So that's where you're going to find most Scientologists. So that is the history of mostly of L. Ron Hubbard, which I feel like was really important that we covered it because he's crazy a little bit. I'm not any doctor. I don't know if he's actually crazy, but there's some crazy stuff that's going on, and I needed to share it because his history, I think, really ties into what Scientology is and how the organization is still run and all the crazy conspiracy theories that you're going to hear behind it. So next week, we are going to talk conspiracy theories. We're going to talk Scientology more again, and then I'm sure I'll just do like a 1-part episode after that. Maybe, who knows? But until then, my friends, stay skeptical, and I will see you all next week. Hey friends, The Rabbit Hole is an independent podcast with everything you hear done by me, Danny Mercy. I appreciate all of your support. Please rate and review wherever you're listening. If you want to follow us on Instagram, it's at rabbit.holepodcast. And thank you, Zakar Valaha, for our awesome intro.